So what is going on, everybody? Fernando Silva here with another video, and before we get started, if you guys notice, we are using actually the cinematic mode on the iPhone 13 Pro Max as the main camera. So leave a comment down below. Do you like it? Is it a little bit weird? I kind of like it because it adds a little bit of crispiness and makes it seem like we have some actual true depth in here, but I digress. Today we're actually going to be talking about the top 5 reasons why I actually recommend this iPad mini as your next iPad. Because Apple created an iPad here there's a lot to like about it in terms of functionality, form factor, new design, the size of it, obviously. So we're gonna get into it, and I'm gonna give you guys my top 5 reasons why I recommend this as your next iPad. But let's get into it. So like I said, we're gonna break this down into the top 5 reasons why we're gonna actually recommend this iPad. And the first one has to be the new A15 Bionic. Now, this was actually not announced on stage, and I feel like Apple did this on purpose because they didn't want to cannibalize the iPad Air 4 sales now, because that one still has the A14, and then also because they just wanted to show off how powerful it was, right? So Apple did not announce that we had the A15 in here, but lo and behold, we do. And the A15 Bionic is the latest chipset. It's in all the new iPhone 13s. It's probably going to be added to the new iPad Air 4 whenever it comes out, but as of right now, if you're looking at it spec by spec, this is the most powerful iPad in their lineup aside from the M1 processors. And even those, we don't really know how much more powerful they are because it's still based on that A14 architecture and all that good stuff, so we're definitely going to run it through its paces. But I think for single task use, so if you're not using multi-core or a lot of GPU stuff, for single task use, this A15 Bionic is going to run through everything for you. So for instance, my use cases over the weekend were watching a lot of football, right? So I would use YouTube TV or the NFL Sunday Ticket application, have that on one side with multitasking, then I would have my FanDuel on the other side, and I'm also have my iMessage in a slide overview so I can message people as I'm watching these games and interacting with people. And that's all done with the A15 and iPadOS 15. And people have been saying, hey, you have the iPad mini and you have an iPhone Pro Max, like why get an iPad mini if the Pro Max is like almost the same size? And the main reason is because of that iPadOS functionality on these iPad minis versus iOS on the Pro Maxes. And iPadOS allows you to actually have some sort of multitasking, and that's what I've loved this for, right? It's still a single hand use kind of machine and computer, but now I can do a lot more instead of kind of having to go from app to app. For instance, in that same use case, sometimes I do use my phone to go on YouTube TV and watch these football games, but then I have to leave YouTube TV to then check my FanDuel, or I have to leave YouTube TV to answer a text message of like, oh my God, did you guys see that catch, or something like that. And then again, I have to go back to YouTube TV and then press play. So again, the first reason why we're gonna go with this iPad mini 6 has to be that A15 Bionic, and it's the best chipset on any tablet outside of the iPad Pro lineup. So reason number 2 as to why I recommend this iPad mini 6 is the new form factor. So this new form factor is the first real change in the iPad mini lineup since it released, I think back in 2012, I think that's when they released it. iPad mini 1 through 5 looked exactly the same, and it was almost impossible to differentiate them, right? But here, now we have literally a shrunken iPad Air 4, right? We have the same kind of camera bump, we have the same form factor, just a little bit smaller in order to fit into one hand, which is something that we couldn't really say before unless you had NBA hands, right? Unless you had above average size hands. You can't really, any other iPad you can't really hold with one hand like this. You would have to kind of cup it in the back, right? But again, Apple went with that all aluminum feel, the more industrial design, the squared off edges, and then finally, they went full screen and they give us a uniform and universal kind of bezel along the sides. One thing that I do wish they actually added in here was Face ID instead of Touch ID, because Touch ID on these iPads, I'm not a big fan of it. I wasn't a fan of it on the iPad Air 4, not a fan of it here, because when you do press on the Touch ID, and I'm going to touch on this in a different video, but for the Touch ID, your instinct is to actually press down on the Touch ID, when in fact that's just going to lock the screen even if you are trying to unlock it. So it's kind of weird, you got to get used to it in terms of actually having to unlock it with Touch ID. But outside of the unlocking mechanism and the biometrics, the actual design is amazing. Even down to the volume rockers. So the volume rockers got moved from the sides to the top of it, and that has to do for, on the right side is for the Apple Pencil 2, and on the left side is for magnetic accessories, so they had to move it to the top for the volume rocker. But even at any orientation, the volume rockers know which orientation you're holding it in, so it'll take that into account when it's going up and down. So for instance, if you want to go volume up in one orientation, it's one button, but if you flip it totally upside down, the up volume is the other button, because it's taking into account your orientation using the gyroscopes and the accelerometers to make sure that you do have the best experience when using the volume rockers, because now they're kind of in an awkward spot. I'm not gonna lie, it looks kind of funky, and it's probably just because we're not used to it and we're so used to having the volume rockers on the side of pretty much all of our devices, but you get used to it pretty quickly and it's nothing ugly or anything like that. But again, that is the design. Love the new design, and it makes it just a lot easier to hold in the hand as well. And then reason number 3, which we already just touched on very, very briefly, is the addition of Apple Pencil 2 support. So now you have the ability, if you have an Apple Pencil 2 from any of your iPad Pros or your iPad Air 4, you can take that same Apple Pencil, slap it on here, and now you have a fully functioning Apple Pencil 2, which works perfectly on here. I am still waiting for Paperlike to drop their Paperlike version of the screen protector for this size, because they don't have one yet. Because right now I feel a little bit awkward, especially with the all glass display. It just doesn't feel natural to write with an Apple Pencil. Like, I'm very, very opposed to writing directly on the screen of the iPad with an Apple Pencil, because I feel like it's going to scratch up the screen. It doesn't feel as fluid. You can't get as accurate. There's no resistance on it. So I kind of played with it a little bit, but just know that we do have Apple Pencils 2 support, and I'm just personally waiting for the Paperlike screen protector to come in once they actually release the iPad mini variant, which they will very, very soon. But definitely check them out down below if you guys want to pre-order those. That was a simple one. Reason number 3, Apple Pencil just unlocks a lot more things from a drawing standpoint, design standpoint. Affinity photo sounds a little bit better instead of using with your finger. And also, I know that all the other iPads, especially the older ones, supported the Apple Pencil 1, but that charging mechanism that goes down here, miss me with that. I don't want that in my lineup. Again, Apple Pencil 2 support, reason number 3. Now we move on to reason number 4, and reason number 4 is actually just the USB-C port. The USB-C port coming to the iPad mini is a pretty big deal. Now again, I don't think that Apple really wants this to be a professional device, or at least a professional, I don't know, like design device. It doesn't want to replace the iPad Pros, it doesn't want to replace the MacBook Airs and things like that. And the reason I say that is because they didn't put any pin connectors on this one. This is the only iPad in the lineup with no pin connectors, which means we're not gonna have any first-party keyboard accessories or any first-party accessories for that matter. We do have a first-party like folio case that acts as a stand, but that's a very classic design that's been around since like 2010 with the original iPads. But outside of that, the reason the USB-C helps out so much is because of the fact that now all these peripherals that you've been using with your iPads Pros from 2018 and 2020 will now work with this iPad mini, and even your iPad Air 4 accessories, so you can charge, you can use a USB-C hub, you can use something like shift screen and then display that on a secondary monitor. So this does have all the makings of being able to be a computer if that's in your workflow. Like, this is very easy to plug in, and it's going to work just like an iPad Pro if you have the right peripherals, like a nice keyboard, like the Magic Trackpad, all those things. So having that USB-C port just gives you an influx of new accessories that you can use, right? Because before we were limited to that Lightning cable and Lightning to begin with. So yes, there were adapters, and there still are, like a Lightning to HDMI or a Lightning to VGA, Lightning to USB-A, Lightning to USB-C. But again, that's all kind of minimized to only one option. And now with USB-C, you can plug in a 15-in-1 USB-C drive, and all of a sudden, this iPad Pro is charging your iPhone, it's connected to an external display, you have an SSD connected to it. So those are all things that now come with a USB-C port, again, making it a little bit more professional and allowing you to use a lot more peripherals. Like being able to plug in a DSLR directly into here was something that we could not do ever with those iPad minis from the past, at least not with a workaround that we needed to do. So adding that USB-C port shouldn't go overlooked, even though it was something that should have been easy to do, and it really was. But overall, USB-C port, very, very welcome. And then the last category we're going to talk about is actual cameras. So I was actually taking some pictures with the rear camera. We now have a 12 megapixel sensor on the back with a flash. It's a single camera sensor, but still, it still has that 12 megapixel camera that Apple has optimized over and over and over again. I mean, think about it. We still have 12 megapixel cameras on this iPhone 13 Pro Max, and it works amazingly. So Apple's been able to really prioritize the camera, even though we only have a single sensor, and it works really well. And then on the selfie camera side, they upgraded that as well, giving us a 122-degree viewing angle and allowing us to use center stage. And the reason I like that a lot is because this, again, to me, is a content consumption machine. And again, it's going to help with video chatting and simple things like that, quick on-the-go content consumption. I consider FaceTime kind of a content consumption kind of a category. And center stage just helps with that. I'm a big fan of center stage. It works as advertised. It doesn't really change how you interact with FaceTime, but it's just a nice little added feature that if you like it, you can turn on, and if you don't like it, you can turn off. But I do like the fact that we now have that wider sensor, 122-degree viewing angle, so you can fit multiple people, or if you're trying to show something off, you know, like if you have yourself on camera and you're trying to show a piece of paper, or your other iPad, or your iPhone, you can now do that without having to like back up a ton. So overall, I do welcome these camera upgrades, and I'm excited to use them as we move forward. Like this for scanning documents is going to be awesome as well, because now you can do that within the file system as of iOS 14 and iPadOS 14, so absolutely love it. And then the last thing I do want to mention is, I guess, an honorable mention, but it does go with the fact that we're now using iPadOS 15 and the A15 Bionic, is this iPadOS 15 has made this more than just another phone, right? It's not big enough to be an iPad and a work machine, but it's now I have a different device and I'm using it a little bit differently than I would use my cell phone on the couch, for instance, because now I can multitask with multiple apps. Yes, it's still a relatively small screen, especially if you're coming from the 12.9 inch and multitasking that way, but for simple things like having text messages up and Twitter up at the same time, or Twitter and a YouTube video and vice versa, this is gonna be an awesome machine for that because it's so portable. So portability is probably the honorable mention here, with iPadOS 15 being at the forefront. But those are my 5-6 reasons as to why this iPad mini is going to be worth it, either at the $500 price point or the $650. If you're going to be doing some work on it, then obviously go with the 256. But if you aren't going to do like any work and it's going to be all content consumption, you really should just stick with the 64 gig, save the 150 bucks, get it for $500, and the experience is going to be awesome. But that's going to be my 2 cents. Again, let me know what you guys think of this camera angle. Super curious to get some feedback on that. But let me know down below. Are you guys going to get the iPad mini? Did you get the iPad mini already? Are you enjoying it? What are you using it for? I would love to hear some actual work examples of where this is going to fit in your workflow from a serious work standpoint. You know, not like little note taking and like planning and things like that, but if you're doing something serious, like if you're an engineer using AR, or if you're a doctor using it in, you know, in the ICU or something like that, like I would love to hear those stories. But that's going to do it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, peace.